Hello, TN Shadow Stories viewers. When night falls, for most of us, it's a time when the day's worries fade, giving way to peace and sleep. But for some, as the sun dims, the shadows aren't just the absence of light, they're the genesis of terror. The two stories you're about to hear are chilling whispers from those very moments, when a seemingly simple job suddenly becomes a nightmare, and the safety of everyday life is torn apart by an unexpected threat. December 2019, the chill of that winter hung heavy in the air, but the true cold, the one that still gnaws at my bones, settled deep in my soul. Even after nearly 5 years, that night, that string of nights, remains a raw, unhealed wound in my memory. It wasn't a ghostly apparition or a spectral whisper, but something far more insidious, a primal dread born from the depths of human darkness. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, a chilling education in terror. I was 20 then, a young woman navigating the tricky currents of early adulthood, working as a delivery girl for Papa Leo's Pizzeria, a popular spot in our sleepy suburban town. Initially, my shifts were late mornings to mid-afternoons, a comfortable rhythm of sunshine and predictable faces. I'd ferry pizzas to bustling offices and cheerful family homes, the mundane routine a gentle anchor in my otherwise uncertain life. But then, destiny, or perhaps just cruel circumstance, intervened with a brutal shove. The night shift guy, a perpetually grumpy fellow named Gary, got himself fired after a DUI cost him his license. Without a second thought, my boss, a burly man named Mr. Henderson who possessed the empathy of a brick, shoved me into the vacant night slot. His justification, he'd hired a family friend, a fresh-faced college kid who, for reasons known only to the universe, could only work my daytime hours. I hated it. The mere thought of it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. Delivering pizza late at night carried an unspoken dread, a whispered warning in the darkest corners of my mind. You never truly knew who was on the other side of that door after dark. Were they genuinely craving a pepperoni pie, their hunger innocent and predictable, or did they harbor other, far more sinister intentions? My imagination, usually a comforting ally, began to conjure shadows and unseen dangers behind every closed door, turning mundane porch lights into beacons of potential terror. "Look, Chloe!" Mr. Henderson had grunted, leaning over the counter, his breath smelling of stale garlic and indifference. "If you're not willing to work the night shift, you're fired. Simple as that." His words were a blunt instrument, cutting through any protest, any plea. I was fresh out of options, barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. The idea of being jobless in the middle of winter was a colder prospect than any delivery, a plunge into an even deeper abyss of financial anxiety. So, with a reluctant nod and a knot tightening in my stomach, I swallowed my fear and took the shift. The first month passed in a blur of fluorescent streetlights and the comforting smell of hot cardboard pizza boxes. Surprisingly, nothing untoward happened. Each night, I'd return to the pizzeria, keys jingling a small song of triumph, a sigh of relief escaping my lips as I clocked out. The mundane rhythm of the job, the familiar turns, the quick transactions, lulled me into a false sense of security. The initial dread began to recede, replaced by a weary acceptance. Perhaps I had been overthinking. Perhaps the night wasn't so different after all. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of sounds and lights, seemed to shrink and hush after midnight, leaving behind only the hushed whispers of passing cars and the distant hum of machinery. It was a Tuesday night, late December, roughly a month and a half into my new schedule. The kind of night when the moon hid behind a thick veil of clouds, casting the world in shades of charcoal and silver. The air was still, heavy with unspoken secrets. Around 11:00 p.m., an order came in, its destination just barely within our delivery radius. I punched the address into my GPS, a pretty suburban part of the city, familiar enough, yet distant enough to feel isolated, like a forgotten limb of the urban sprawl. The drive was unremarkable. the radio playing a soft rock tune that seemed to fade into the growing silence outside my car. As I turned onto the designated street, the first tendrils of unease began to creep in, cold and subtle. The block was eerily quiet, a silence so profound it felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. Though decently lit by modern streetlights, the quiet amplified every rustle of unseen leaves, every distant dog bark, making the ordinary feel ominous. Most of the houses were modern townhouses, their windows dark, suggesting the inhabitants were already asleep, their lives tucked away behind drawn blinds. But the address I was headed to was a duplex, its two halves standing side by side like mismatched twins, a subtle deviation from the uniform suburban landscape. It felt like a small, architectural anomaly, a place that might hide something out of place. I pulled up to the curb, the engine's hum a loud intrusion in the profound stillness. Clutching the warm pizza box, its comforting weight a small anchor. I walked up the short path to the front door. The porch light was on, casting a dim, sickly yellow glow on the aging wood, illuminating swirling motes of dust in the cold air. I pressed the doorbell. A crisp, almost too loud ding-dong echoed in the silence, a sound that seemed to hang in the air, reverberating. I waited. 30 seconds stretched into an eternity, each tick of an imaginary clock amplifying the tension. No answer. My heart began a faint thrum against my ribs. A tiny, cold worm of nervousness wriggled in my stomach. I rang again, holding my breath, my gaze darting to the silent windows. Another 30 seconds crawled by, each second a tiny eternity. Still no answer. Now, the nervousness morphed into a prickle of genuine anxiety. Was something wrong? Was this a trap? My mind, trained by those college seminars on human trafficking, immediately began to flag potential dangers, sending warning signals through my veins. I shifted my weight, unconsciously assessing my surroundings, my hands subtly brushing against the small pepper spray I kept clipped to my belt loop, a tiny, cold comfort. Just as I considered retreating, turning heel and driving away, the door creaked open, slowly, revealing a man. He looked to be in his late 40s, tall compared to my 5'4" frame, perhaps a little over 6 feet, but alarmingly skinny. His body seemed to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it, making him appear almost two-dimensional. His eyes, though, were what truly caught my attention. They were wide, unfocused, with a blank, almost vacant stare, like windows to an empty room, utterly devoid of warmth or recognition. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the dim light, making the faint blue veins on his temples stand out starkly, like a map of something unsettling. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just old, faded sweatpants, and the sight of his gaunt frame sent another small shiver down my spine, a visceral reaction to something deeply unsettling. "Your pizza is here," I managed, my voice sounding oddly thin and reedy in the quiet night, barely a whisper. He just stood there, staring, his gaze unwavering, unblinking, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity that felt like a physical touch. It was unsettling. The silence stretched again, filled only by the distant hum of my car and the frantic, almost desperate beat of my own heart. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of trepidation, a thread of fear woven through the polite question. A long moment passed before he blinked, slowly, as if emerging from a deep trance. "Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry, just got off work not too long ago." Zoning out a bit, his voice was flat, devoid of any real warmth or sincerity, a monotone that grated on my nerves, like gravel grinding against stone. "Fair enough, I suppose," I mumbled, trying to reassure myself, though the words felt hollow. He fumbled in his sweatpants pocket and pulled out a wad of crumpled bills, handling them as if they were unfamiliar objects. As he counted out the money with surprisingly slow, deliberate movements, I handed him the pizza box, its lingering warmth a small, fleeting comfort against the chill in the air and the growing cold in my stomach. And then Just as I was counting his change, his eyes, as still disturbingly vacant, drifted over my face, lingering on my features with an unnerving intensity. "You're really beautiful. You know that," he said, his voice a low, almost husky murmur, a sound that felt less like a compliment and more like a predatory whisper. The compliment, coming from him, in that strange late-night setting, felt less like flattery and more like a violation, an invasion of my personal space even without physical touch. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way they were delivered, the blankness in his gaze that made them feel utterly wrong, tainted. My stomach clenched, a cold knot forming deep within, but trying to appear unfazed, to simply get out of there as quickly as possible. I forced a small, polite smile, a mask over my growing unease. "Thank you," I said, handing him his change, my fingers brushing against his, feeling cold and clammy. "Have a good night." "You too," he responded, his eyes still fixed on me, unblinking, as if trying to memorize every contour of my face. I turned, walking briskly back to my car, the artificial warmth of the pizza box still clinging to my fingertips, a phantom warmth that couldn't banish the chill. The silence of the street felt heavier now, charged with something unseen, something lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I drove away, grateful for the familiar hum of the engine, the roar of my tires on the asphalt, and finished my remaining deliveries, trying, desperately, to push the unsettling encounter from my mind. A few days later, the memory of the strange man had faded into the background, replaced by the usual demands of my job. The incident had been filed away under weird customer encounters, a minor footnote in the daily grind. Then, an order came in, the same address. My heart gave a little lurch, a cold, unwelcome spasm. No, it couldn't be. This was just a coincidence. People ordered pizza. Frequently, I tried to convince myself, to rationalize away the prickle of fear. I headed over around the same time, the darkness of the late evening already settling like a thick blanket. This time, the street felt even colder, the silence deeper, as if the very air was holding its breath. As I approached the duplex, an unshakable sense of foreboding tightened its grip on me, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The porch light was on again, a solitary beacon in the encroaching gloom, highlighting the worn steps and the shadowed recesses of the doorway. I rang the doorbell. Almost immediately, the door flung open, revealing the same man. But this time, he wasn't just standing there. He was excited, a wide, unsettling smile stretching across his pale face, revealing too much gum. His eyes, though still strangely unfocused, held a disturbing glimmer of recognition, a glint that sent a cold wave of apprehension through me. "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" he exclaimed, his voice too loud, too cheerful for the quiet night, for the solemnity of the shadowed house. It grated on my nerves, like nails on a chalkboard. "Tired," I admitted, the truth escaping me in my weariness, a defense mechanism against any further small talk. "Can't wait to go home," he chuckled, a dry, grating sound, devoid of humor. "I know that feeling pretty well," and he said, pulling out his wallet with deliberate slowness. As he began counting his money, his eyes, unnervingly intense, fixed on me, not blinking, not wavering. "What's your name, by the way?" My mind, dulled by the late hour and a creeping sense of unease, betrayed me. It was a stupid, foolish mistake, a lapse in judgment born of exhaustion and a desire to simply get the transaction over with. "Chloe," I heard myself say, the word feeling alien as it left my lips, echoing unnervingly in the quiet. "Chloe," he repeated, savoring the name, letting it roll off his tongue like a secret, a prized possession. It made my skin crawl, a feeling of violation settling deep in my bones. As I handed him his change, his fingers brushing against mine, feeling cold and damp, he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "Chloe, Can I have your number? I'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as you are. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the cage of my chest. My mind screamed a silent, desperate warning. I had met this man twice, for mere minutes, delivering pizza. I had no idea who he was, what his intentions were, and he was clearly much older than me, at least 20 years, a fact that suddenly felt overwhelmingly menacing. The compliment, this time, felt like a predatory snare, an invisible net tightening around me. I stood there, frozen in an awkward silence for a few seconds, the air thick with unspoken tension, with his unspoken expectation. My voice, when it came, was a desperate whisper, barely audible. Sorry, I have a boyfriend. His face, which had been stretched in that unsettling smile, immediately fell. The light in his eyes, if it ever truly existed, vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger. Oh, okay, I see. The words were clipped, cold, dripping with an unsettling disappointment. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, filled with his unspoken disappointment and something darker, something simmering beneath the surface. My fight-or-flight instincts were screaming, a siren wailing in my head. Have a good night, I managed, my voice barely audible, a desperate plea for escape. I turned quickly, practically power-walking back to my car, desperate to escape his oppressive presence, his chilling stare. He said nothing, but as I glanced back, I saw him still standing in the doorway, a silent, menacing statue, staring, unblinking, until I finally started my car and sped away, leaving him a motionless figure in the dim porch light. Once I was driving, a chilling realization washed over me. This guy wasn't just creepy, he was obsessed. The word resonated with a cold, hollow ring in my mind. I brought it up to my coworkers the next day. They all agreed it was pretty unsettling, their faces mirroring my unease. All, that is, except for Mr. Henderson, who, of course, overheard everything. He scoffed, his face contorted in a sneer, claiming I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy to get off the night shift. His callous dismissal of my very real fear only fueled my growing sense of isolation and vulnerability. How could I be safe if even my boss didn't believe me? The dread clung to me like a shroud over the next week. Every delivery felt like a potential trap. Every shadowed doorway seemed to hold a lurking figure, waiting, watching. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every strange noise in the night jolted me awake, my mind racing, imagining the worst. My heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. My phone became a constant companion, its screen a small shield against the encroaching darkness, its vibrations a lifeline to the outside world. I texted my boyfriend constantly, seeking reassurance, though I knew he couldn't truly understand the cold grip of fear that had taken hold, the phantom hands that seemed to reach for me from the shadows. Then, inevitably, the order came in again. The same address. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. This was it. This was when it truly hit the fan. It was a particularly dark night, the kind where the suburban streetlights seemed swallowed by the inky blackness, their light dim and inadequate. I arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m., but as I approached, from the perspective of the road, it didn't look like a single light in that duplex was on. The windows were gaping, dark squares, like empty eye sockets staring into the void, reflecting nothing but the oppressive darkness. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a premonition of something deeply wrong. I got out of my car, the sound of the door closing echoing unnaturally loud in the profound silence, a solitary clap in a world holding its breath. Clutching the pizza box, its warmth doing little to comfort me, I walked toward the front door. Every step felt heavy, each beat of my heart a thunderous drum in my ears, vibrating through my entire body. The porch light was out tonight, plunging the immediate area into an even deeper gloom, making the familiar path a tunnel of shadows. As I approached, just a few feet from the door. It swung open abruptly. The sudden movement, the unexpectedness, made me gasp aloud, jumping back, my heart leaping into my throat, threatening to choke me. The figure standing in the doorway was the man. But this time, he was different. He was wearing a dark suit, almost swallowed by the shadows of the unlit house behind him. The suit, stark against his pale skin, made him look even gaunter, more menacing, like a figure conjured from a nightmare. His eyes, though still difficult to discern in the gloom, seemed to glow with a chilling, internal light. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine, like nails dragging across a cold, metallic surface. "Sorry if I scared you," he said, that unsettling smile playing on his lips, stretching them unnaturally. "I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door now so you wouldn't have to knock." My blood froze. He saw me out the window, but there were no lights on in the house. How could he have seen me? Was he just sitting there in the dark, in that silent black house, waiting for me? And if so, why the thought was a chilling, invasive tendril of fear wrapping around my sanity, threatening to strangle me. "It's okay," I managed, a nervous, breathless laugh escaping me, a sound of pure terror. My voice was a thin thread of sound, barely audible, lost in the heavy silence. "Do you like my suit?" he asked, his eyes, those vacant, disturbing eyes, scanning me with an unnerving intensity that felt like a physical violation. "Yes," I lied, the word a desperate whisper, barely leaving my lips. Anything to appease him, to get out of this, to make him satisfied enough to let me go. Then his smile widened, stretching into a truly predatory grimace, devoid of any human warmth. "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the hell? The audacity, the sheer nerve of him in this terrifying, isolated moment. My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. I told you," I stammered, my voice trembling, breaking with fear. "I have a boyfriend," he chuckled again, a dry, mocking sound that scraped against my ears. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, his imposing height suddenly feeling suffocating. The scent of stale cologne and something metallic, something vaguely acrid, filled my nostrils, making me gag slightly. "Honey," he purred, his voice low, filled with a sickening confidence. "There's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship." His eyes, now closer, seemed to bore into mine, holding me captive, pinning me in place. "If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." Before I could even process his words, before I could react, before my paralyzed mind could formulate a scream, he moved. His hand shot out, a blur of motion, grabbing the pizza box from my arms, tossing it carelessly to the side. The cardboard box hit the ground with a soft thud, a mundane sound that only served to highlight the horror of the moment, the stark contrast between the ordinary object and the extraordinary terror. Then, his other hand shot out, grabbing my arms hard. His grip was like a vice, crushing, painfully tight, digging into my flesh. I was officially frozen solid, bricks in my stomach, every muscle locked in terror, every fiber of my being screaming to run. My throat felt tight, raw, a knot of pure panic. I tried not to cry, the overwhelming fear threatening to burst through every dam I had built, every shred of composure I possessed. "Hey, dude, please," I pleaded, my voice cracking, tears stinging my eyes, blurring my vision. "I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." My words were desperate, pathetic pleas. His eyes, those dark, empty eyes, stared into mine with the most sinister, chilling look I'd ever seen on a human face. It was the gaze of a predator, utterly devoid of empathy, of humanity. "I don't care," he snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated through my bones, a sound of pure, unadulterated menace. "Get inside now. We are going to have a good time." He began to pull me, trying to drag me into the inky blackness of the house, a gaping maw waiting to swallow me whole. I resisted with all my might, my feet scraping against the concrete porch, leaving streaks, my nails digging into his suit jacket, desperate to find purchase. Panic surged through me, a primal scream trapped in my throat, begging for release. I thrashed, desperately trying to break free, to escape his crushing grip. But his hold was unyielding, iron strong. After a few agonizing seconds of struggle, seconds that stretched into an eternity, he surprisingly let go of one of my arms. My heart leaped, a flicker of desperate hope igniting within me. But then, my blood ran cold again, solidifying in my veins. With his free hand, he began to reach into his pocket, his movements deliberate, terrifying. His eyes still fixed on mine. My mind, fueled by sheer, unadulterated terror, screamed one word, vibrating through my skull knife. That's when I did something that, to this day, I am profoundly thankful worked. As he was fumbling in his pocket, as his fingers brushed against something metallic, cold and sharp, I used my free arm. I wound it back, summoning every ounce of strength born from pure adrenaline, and punched him, as hard as I possibly could, directly in his stomach. The blow, unexpected and desperate, caught him entirely off guard. He grunted, a short, sharp sound, like air being forced from a bellows. And for a few precious seconds, he was stunned, his eyes widening in surprise, his grip faltering. His hold on my other arm loosened just enough. It was all I needed. I yanked my arm free, stumbling backward, adrenaline coursing through my veins, making my limbs feel both heavy and impossibly light. "Run!" my mind shrieked, a primal, insistent command. "Run!" I spun around, sprinting toward my car, the cold night air burning my lungs with every ragged breath. I fumbled frantically with the car door handle, my hands slick with sweat and terror, my fingers clumsy. Just as I managed to yank it open, a shadow fell over me. He was on me. He ran at me, a terrifying blur in the dim light, trying to pull me out of the car, his other hand now visible, clutching a gleaming knife, its blade reflecting the distant streetlights. "Why are you making this so difficult?" he yelled, his voice a distorted, enraged roar, a sound of pure animalistic fury. My eyes darted around the car's interior, desperate, searching for anything, any weapon. My gaze landed on a half-empty soda bottle in the cup holder. Without thinking, pure instinct taking over, primal survival overriding all reason, I snatched it and flung it with all my might. Luck, or perhaps a guardian angel, was on my side. The bottle hit his head with a sickening thud, a dull, wet sound. He grunted, his grip faltered, his eyes widened in momentary pain and surprise, and he let go, stumbling backward. I slammed the car door shut, the click of the lock a small, pathetic sound against the cacophony of my pounding heart, but a sound of survival nonetheless. But it wasn't over. Not yet. All of a sudden, he leaped right onto the hood of my car, a grotesque, demonic silhouette against the darkness. The impact sent a violent jolt through the vehicle, rocking it side to side. My blood ran cold again, a wave of nausea washing over me, making me lightheaded. He began to scratch and bang on my windshield with his knife, the terrifying sound echoing in the confined space of my car, like a demon trying to claw its way in, leaving jagged white lines across the glass. Obscuring my view, his face, distorted by rage, was pressed against the windshield, his eyes burning with a manic fury, a truly terrifying sight. Panic seized me, a blinding, overwhelming force that threatened to consume me. I jammed the car into reverse, slamming on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the car lurched backward, throwing him off balance. He desperately tried to hold on, his screams muffled by the metal of the hood, a desperate, animalistic wail. "Stop the car," he shrieked, his voice raw with desperation and fury as he continued to bang on the hood, the knife glinting under the dim streetlights, a horrifying rhythm against the metal. I reversed quickly down the road, away from the terrifying duplex, away from the monster. As I reached the next street, I turned the wheel as swiftly as possible, feeling the car sway, a dangerous maneuver. With that sudden, violent turn, he finally lost his grip, tumbling off the hood and disappearing from my rearview mirror, a horrifying image fading into the darkness. I slammed the gas pedal down as hard as I could, my foot trembling uncontrollably. I needed to get as far away from that sick bastard as possible. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline, a frantic, desperate chaos. In my panicked state, I drove a couple blocks down the street, making turn after turn onto other side blocks, taking random routes, fearing I was still being followed, that his shadow might be lurking around any corner, any darkened alley. Eventually, the world seemed to freeze. A red light. I slammed on the brakes, sending my car skidding slightly, and just sat there at the intersection, utterly frozen by what had just happened. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by my ragged breaths, loud and desperate. And then the dam broke. I began crying, violently shaking, deep, guttural sobs racking my body, convulsive and unstoppable. As I sat there trembling, tears streaming down my face, a horrifying realization dawned on me. I had come so incredibly close to losing my life. The thought was a cold, sharp knife twisting in my gut, an agonizing pain. I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive, like I had cheated death itself. The sheer randomness, the pure malice of the encounter, left me reeling, shattered. Once the light finally turned green, I managed to pull over to the side of the road, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, and just continued crying. The world outside felt distant, unreal, as if I was watching it through a thick pane of glass. Eventually, the adrenaline began to subside, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I somehow gathered the energy to drive back to Papa Leo's Pizzeria. The familiar neon sign, a small comfort in the vast, terrifying night. I stumbled into the pizzeria, my legs barely holding me up, feeling like jelly. Almost immediately, my co-worker, Mark, who was still on duty, knew something was terribly wrong. His eyes widened as he saw my tear-streaked face, my disheveled hair, the raw fear etched into every line of my body. I practically broke down in front of him, my voice a shaky whisper, choked with sobs. And soon, everyone else came to the front, drawn by the commotion, wondering what was going on. Fighting back a fresh wave of tears, I explained everything that had just happened, as calmly as my shattered nerves would allow, each word a struggle. Mark immediately came to my side, offering comfort and support, his hand gently patting my back. To my surprise, Mr. Henderson, who had previously dismissed my fears with such callousness, looked genuinely horrified, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by something akin to shock. He began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. His word, though late, offered a small, fragile glimmer of validation, a recognition of my ordeal. He took me into his office and handed me the phone to call the police. They arrived at the store surprisingly quickly, their flashing lights a beacon in the darkness. I gave them my statement, my voice still trembling, but now steadier, fueled by a strange mix of anger and a desperate need for justice. They took pictures of any marks on myself, the red impressions on my arms from his crushing grip, and the horrifying scratches on my car from the knife, all as vital evidence. My kind co-worker, Mark, followed behind me as I drove home, a silent guardian in the dark, making sure I arrived safely. I collapsed onto my bed the moment I got home, the exhaustion consuming me. Strangely enough, despite the trauma, I managed to fall asleep almost immediately. I was just that utterly, completely drained, mentally and physically. I quit my job the very next day, The thought of ever stepping foot into that pizzeria again, of driving those dark, silent streets, filled me with an insurmountable dread, a sickening aversion. Luckily, a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store, a place bathed in sunlight and filled with the cheerful chatter of customers, a world away from the shadows I had just escaped, a sanctuary from the creeping terror. As for that psycho, the police contacted me 2 days later with an update, a grim piece of news that would bring a strange, cold closure. Apparently, the entire duplex was owned by his brother, who lived on the right side with his wife. The psycho, whose name they withheld, lived on the left side, a festering darkness beside an ordinary life. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly, first for petty robberies and violent assaults, but later on, for much darker crimes, sex offenses, a chilling confirmation of his true nature. He had actually been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having sex with a minor. The officer's words painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual, a predator lurking in plain sight. When the police arrived at the house, he was long gone, vanished into the night like a wraith. His family claimed they had no idea where he had run off to, feigning ignorance, or perhaps genuinely terrified themselves. But the police insisted they would find him, their voices firm with determination, and indeed, they did, but not alive. I spent the next 2 months living in a constant state of fear. Every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the floorboards a confirmation that he would find me and finish what he had in mind. The dread was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe, a constant, suffocating presence that the police called again. They updated me on the case. Apparently, he had fled to another city nearby and, true to his nature, attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street, just as he had tried with me. Luckily, someone happened to be looking out their window at the right time and called the cops, a stroke of pure, divine intervention. The police caught him trying to force her into his car. He managed to flee again, and a high-speed chase ensued through the city streets. He blew through a red light near a busy boulevard, ignoring all warnings, all safety. And then, a van, unseen until the last terrifying moment, slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries, a testament to sheer luck. But the psycho, he succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. His grim reign of terror abruptly ended. A profound, chilling silence fell over me as the officer finished speaking, a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't realized was there. I thanked them for everything they did and for informing me, my voice barely above a whisper, filled with a complex mix of emotions. I walked out of the station, the fluorescent lights of the police building feeling too bright, too stark after the darkness I had faced. I walked down the street, found a quiet spot on a bench, and lit up a cigarette, inhaling deeply, letting the smoke fill my lungs as I took in everything I had just been told. I don't usually wish death on anyone. I really don't. But knowing that he was gone, that he could no longer harm anyone else, that he could no longer stalk the nights or fill innocent hearts with the terror he had instilled in mine, there was a grim, unsettling sense of justice. It was a dark, primal relief, a catharsis I hadn't anticipated. If he had managed to pull me into his house that night, if that soda bottle hadn't hit its mark, if fate hadn't intervened, who knows where I'd be now? Who knows how many other lives he would have shattered? The echoes of that night still linger, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most ordinary places and the terrifying fragility of safety. It's a scar, but one that teaches vigilance. December 2019. Even though it's been nearly 5 years, that fateful night remains seared into my mind. Every single detail, like a burn that never heals. It was a terrifying experience to its core, a primal fear, unlike anything I'd ever faced before. Back then, I was a 31-year-old stay-at-home mom to 2 young kids. My life revolved around diapers, formula, and endless afternoons of playful chaos. Each time my husband got home from work, I craved a bit of personal time, Late-night shopping trips to the nearby Target, or sometimes just driving around alone, became precious moments of release. They were rare instances where I got to be just me, not the kid's mom, but simply me, Lauren. That night, like many others, I arrived at my usual Target around 8:30 p.m. The crisp, cold air of early December wrapped around me as I stepped out of the car. The yellowish neon lights from the parking lot cast long, distorted shadows of bare trees onto the dew-kissed asphalt. The parking lot was eerily empty, probably because it was a weekday. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint whistle of the wind through empty shopping carts. I'm not a particularly paranoid or overly anxious person, but during college, I'd attended several seminars on human trafficking, and afterwards, I did a lot of research on my own. I learned to identify red flags, those deadly warning signs, and equip myself with precautions for when I was out in public alone, especially at night. Always observe your surroundings. That was the first lesson I learned as a child. And with my naturally perfectionist, control freak tendencies, being vigilant just came naturally. I always carried several self-defense items on me, just in case. I carefully parked directly in front of the store, next to a cart caddy. My eyes scanned the nearby vehicles, noting their license plates and characteristics, a self-preservation habit deeply ingrained in my subconscious. Everything seemed normal, nothing to worry about. Stepping inside the store, the bright lights, the scent of new plastic mixed with cleaning products, created a stark contrast to the gloom outside. I began to browse, moving through the aisles, relaxing into the familiar rhythm of a late-night shopping trip. I moved along the shelves, enjoying the peace without children screaming or fighting over toys. Only about 10 to 15 minutes later, as I was looking at some household items, a tall figure caught my eye. It was a young man, probably in his mid-20s. He was tall and skinny, dressed in a dirty gray two-piece sweatsuit and brown work boots. His disheveled clothes and appearance made me frown slightly. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over me. Instinctively, I smiled and said, "Good evening," a friendly, familiar gesture, but his face remained blank, devoid of any emotion. His eyes were dull, hazy, like someone high on something. He didn't seem to care for my gesture, moving past quickly, like a shadow. At first glance, there was nothing in particular that alarmed me about him. He just seemed like someone sleep-deprived or in a daze. Only one thing made me pay attention. He was wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket, hands in his pockets, and didn't seem to be with anyone. That was odd for a convenience store like Target, but I quickly dismissed the thought, continuing my shopping and moving to the next department. Several minutes passed. I was choosing some cereals for the kids when a chilling sensation ran down my spine. I looked up, and there he was again. No, not him. It was a second young man, wearing the same type of gray sweatsuit and work boots. Again, no cart, no basket, hands in his pockets. He glanced at me, then quickly darted his eyes away when he realized I was looking directly at him. A gentle wave of alertness washed over me. My heart started beating a bit faster. Another one. I wondered, trying to remain composed. I continued browse, but the initial comfort had vanished. About 15 more minutes passed. I was in the toy section, a place I often frequented to find gifts for the kids. And then, a third, older man caught my attention. He too was wearing the gray sweatsuit and work boots. Also, no cart, no basket, just his hands in his pockets. At this point, a real sense of unease began to creep in. I told myself, maybe they're construction workers, wearing some kind of uniform, but why weren't they walking around together? Why didn't they have anything to buy? And why were all three of them loitering aimlessly in the store, with no clear purpose? My attention was no longer focused on shopping. A deep sense of foreboding settled over me. Something was off. It became clearer than ever. Over the next 20 minutes or so, a heavy feeling of being monitored pressed down on me. It wasn't a fleeting paranoia, but a physical, oppressive sensation. I felt as if they were communicating with each other, informing each other of my whereabouts as I moved through the store. Every time I turned into an aisle, just a few minutes later, one of them would appear, passing by, making their presence explicitly known to me. I tried to remain completely vigilant, not allowing panic or suspicion to overwhelm me, but something about their presence felt very heavy and dark. I decided to test their intentions, to prove I wasn't overthinking the situation, that my bad gut feeling was valid. I started moving erratically, picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between departments in a very unorganized and random fashion. My goal was to see if these men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been. And just as I anticipated, or rather, as my fear told me, every time I popped into an aisle, just a few minutes later, one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed by. It felt as if I was being surrounded, like a wild animal being hunted. The scariest part of it all was that they were no longer trying to be inconspicuous. Their initial subtlety had vanished, replaced by a brazen, threatening demeanor. Every instinctual fiber in my being screamed at me, "Get out! Get out of here now!" I gripped my shopping cart so tightly my knuckles turned white. If they get too close, I thought, I can use this cart to push them away, or at least create distance between us. That was the only thought, as fragile as a spider's silk, clinging to hope. By this point, I had been shopping for about an hour altogether, maybe a bit over. I was ready to check out, but honestly, I felt too uncomfortable to continue browse, even if I wanted to. The three men had been following me that entire time, and I felt annoyance, rather than just fear, starting to overwhelm me. The store was also pretty empty around this time, which is one of the main reasons I like shopping at night, but that made this particular situation even more unsettling. Suddenly, I noticed two preteen girls wandering around by themselves nearby. My eyes lingered on them. The men had bypassed them, not making similar advances as they had with me. The girls seemed utterly oblivious to the lurking threat. My motherly instincts surged. The protective urge for my own children shifted to these girls. I quietly approached them, trying not to spook them. "Girl," I whispered, my voice trying to remain calm. "Go find your parents and stay with them, okay?" That was just the mother in me, in full protection mode. I couldn't imagine having my young children with me on this night. Thank God they were home safe and sound. As I made my way to the checkout, one of the men I'd seen earlier suddenly appeared from behind me, walking at a quicker pace this time. A cold current shot down my spine. I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with him as he approached. I'll never forget the darkness in his eyes, a bottomless, empty void, as if all light had been sucked out. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he brushed past, nudging my shoulder. He continued to stare me down, walking backward to hold his sinister gaze as he exited the store. I had lost sight of the other two men. A horrifying sense of uncertainty enveloped me. He had made his message very clear in that moment. My stomach dropped, and my entire body began to shake violently. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a kid getting lost in the supermarket, a deep sense of desperation, of complete helplessness. I quickly walked to the checkout. Discreetly, I asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager. When the manager arrived, I told her what had transpired over the last hour, politely asking for a male employee to walk me out to my car and for them to alert their security team. The manager's face sank as soon as I began to speak, as if she already knew about these men, and once I described them, she confirmed she knew who I was talking about. She expressed that several of the female employees had found the men unsettling in the past, and reassured me that someone would escort me to my car. She made a report about the incident and said she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking, but I felt relieved that she believed me and showed concern for the other young female workers in the store. She took my information. Then a young male employee walked me out to my car, and what I saw as I exited the store made me so sick to my stomach, solidifying all of my horrifying suspicions. Parked in the lot, directly behind my car, about a 3 parking space distance away, was a white windowless van. One of the men was seated in the driver's seat, The other two were leaning against the side of the van, facing my car, attempting to hide out of view. How could they be so cliché and obvious? I thought their license plate might as well read Lady Snatchers at that point. Whatever their intent, it certainly wasn't pure. I pointed them out to the male employee and said, "There they are." Immediately, the three men scurried into the van and sped out of the parking lot without hesitation. I truly don't know what would have happened if I had walked out to my car alone. I'm so incredibly grateful I made it home safe and sound, and I lived to tell my story. Over the following week, I heard that there were several attempted abductions in the shopping center parallel to that target. I'm almost certain it was the same individuals. The fear still haunts me to this day, a chilling reminder of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of ordinary life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Tina Shadow Stories so you don't miss our next chilling tales. See you in the next video.